Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Christian History. We are talking this week about one of the great ones of one of the, uh, I would guess, top 10 preachers ever, maybe, in Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who we are recognizing the time when he actually made a profession and accepted Christ, which is a really cool part of his whole big story, right? And so we are glad to have Dr. Geoff Chang with us, who is the curator of the Spurgeon Library that is at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, who also is a professor of church history and other things there at the seminary as well. So, Dr. Chang, thank you so much for being with us.
Nick, thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, um, I don't think that was totally hyperbole, right? To be able to talk about Spurgeon if we put him on the top 10 preacher list, right? Don't you think he probably makes that cut?
Yeah, I was wondering if he should be even higher, right? Top five?
Okay, well, sure. At least top 10. How about
Yeah,
that?
at least top 10. That's right.
So, we're talking about we're using this opportunity to talk about his conversion, which we've got down as either January 5th or 6th, 1850. I'm not sure which date, but it's close enough, right, to
Yeah,
do. But
January 6th is the date that I work with.
that's okay. Well, we're sticking with the 6th then. All right. So, tell us a little bit about that event, but then also, really, maybe before we get to that, tell us really who was Spurgeon? What was it that would cause us to want to be able to talk more about him today?
Yeah. Yeah, part of the sort of wonder of his story is, before he was this top 10 preacher preaching there in London, the greatest kind of capital city in the world during the Victorian era, he was a country boy. He grew
Mm.
up in the countryside in Essex. The first 5 years of his life, he lived with his grandfather. Due to some difficulties that his family was having financially, he was sent to go live with his grandfather. His grandfather was a pastor, a Congregationalist pastor.
Oh,
So he
okay.
grew up first 5 years in a pastor's home, watching his grandfather prepare sermons and pastor a congregation. And those years really shaped him. He moved back home. He grew up again in that Congregationalist family. Uh, he began reading the Puritans from an early age. His grandfather had these large Puritan folios that he would go explore his grandfather's study, and he would pull these down, and he would
Huh.
read about, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and the Holy War, Joseph Alleine, Called to the Unconverted, Richard Baxter, all these books. And from an early age, he began to experience a kind of conviction of sin. He had a very sensitive conscience. He was he was never outwardly rebellious, but he was just aware of the pride of his own heart. He was a very bright boy. He was aware of the lusts and impurities of his heart. And he knew that he was a sinner. And yet he grew up around preaching that tended to be, perhaps we might call it more hyper Calvinistic,
Mm.
preaching that told you more about how to live as a Christian, how to prove you're a Christian rather than how to become a Christian.
Okay.
And there wasn't this call for sinners to repent and believe in Christ. And so he sat under a lot of preaching, but he found himself growing increasingly frustrated with himself, his own sinfulness. He veered even for a season into a kind of atheism, and he found that to be utterly hopeless.
Wow.
Um, so he really wrestled for about 4 or 5 years with a kind of awareness of his sinfulness, a kind of despair.
As a young man,
As a
right?
young man, that's
Right.
right.
Okay.
That's right. And uh, finally, until that year, 1850, he was back home on winter break from school. He had decided, I'm going to visit every chapel here in my hometown of Colchester, and then maybe somebody can tell me the way of salvation.
Wow.
And the story goes, he was on that winter morning, he was headed to another chapel when all of a sudden a snowstorm blew in, and he found himself, needing to take shelter. He turns down this alleyway, and he finds shelter in a primitive Methodist chapel there on Artillery Street in Colchester. He goes in, just a handful of people there, the primitive Methodists. He said, he had never been in one of their gatherings. He said they sang so loud it made his head ache. And he puts up with the singing, And finally, some unknown preacher gets up. He was clearly a layman. He talks about in his autobiography that this was clearly not a preacher. He was some shoemaker or some sort of, craftsman, clearly uneducated. He actually said he was actually quite stupid, and he really didn't have much to say. But he took for his text Isaiah 45, "Look unto me and be saved, all you ends of the earth." And he gets up and he preaches a very simple sermon. He says, all of you here, you are looking to yourself for salvation. No, God says, look to me, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and really, you shouldn't be looking to the Holy Spirit. That worry about that later. Don't. He's not even saying look to the Father, but look to Christ for salvation. Just as the Israelites in the wilderness looked to the bronze serpent, so you look to Christ. And then at some point in the sermon, he actually looks at Spurgeon, clearly a visitor, and he says, "Young man, you look miserable, and you will continue to be miserable until you look to Christ. So look to Christ." And Spurgeon said right there and then, it all became clear. He had been waiting to do 1,000 things for God, but all that he needed to do was to look to Christ and be saved. And he said right there, the clouds of his despair parted, and the sun broke through, and he was converted.
Wow.
So
Is that church still there?
that church is still there, the Artillery Street Evangelical Church. They are, yeah, a gospel preaching church by God's grace. We have the original pulpit and pews from that chapel,
Wow.
that here in the Spurgeon Library in Kansas City, Missouri. So I'd like to say that the very pews that Spurgeon was sitting on are right here in Kansas City. Of course, I don't know that for a fact, but it's a nice story.
But that's enough for me, man. That's
Yeah,
enough to
I
want to
know.
visit, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
we
right.
want to talk about the library and about what's involved in that too as we talk more about Spurgeon's life. So did he gets converted in this primitive Methodist church, but he doesn't stay in the Methodist denomination, does he?
That's correct. He went back, he was profoundly converted, and he knew it. He was full of joy. He said after the sermon he could sing with the rest of the congregation, right? The ones that sang so loud that it made his hair hurt, but he was joyfully singing. He went back that evening, or maybe the following Sunday, sorry. He went back to the Methodist the following Sunday thinking this is where I need to be, right? This is where I was converted. And the regularly scheduled preacher preached a sermon on Romans 7,
Hmm.
uh, and he argued that Paul is not writing about the Christian experience, and he began to write about, to preach about kind of a Christian perfectionism, which was, a Wesleyan doctrine.
Sure.
And right there, Spurgeon knew, this is not where I'm at theologically. This is not my tribe. So he kind of moved on from the Methodist, but he never forgot the fact that this is where he was converted. This is where he heard the gospel.
Absolutely. And well, and you got to think about what is he, 14, 15, 16
Yeah,
years old?
15 at this time. That's
I
right.
mean, that number of, I would love to know that when I was 15, I was, thinking about things that deep or wide, and you wonder about how many are or might still be thinking about things that deep and wide. Just that on its own, right, is enough that separates him out
Mm.
from others and from others that would surrender to the call to preach, right?
And yet it is striking that for him, he never forgot that it was a very simple preaching of the gospel that saved him. So yes, he was
Mhm.
immersed in Puritan theology and hearing this sort of high Calvinistic preaching, but this uneducated man preaching the gospel simply, appealing to the heart, that's what the Lord used to save him.
Right. That
And
he understood, right, that hey, you don't have to have all these degrees and all the rest of this
yeah,
stuff to be able to get to the core message of the gospel, and that moved him, right?
yeah,
And
that's exactly right. Yeah.
in a way that well, what happens to him after that? Where does he? How does he get to creating this? I guess we might call it in perspective a mega church, right? Of what that might have been at the end of the 1800s.
Yeah, so he gets converted January of 1850. He's baptized later that spring. So he becomes a Baptist. He's convinced of believers' baptism. Um, so he receives baptism there that May. By that summer, he's moved to Cambridge. He's working there in Cambridge as a tutor. He joins officially St. Andrew's Baptist Church. So he's officially kind of part of that Baptist denomination, if you will. And there at St. Andrews, they have a lay preaching society. Uh, these are young men who are going out to the villages and leading services
Mm.
on Saturdays, Sunday evenings. And so he's involved at St. Andrews. He's teaching Sunday school, and the person who heads the lay preaching society notices this young man. He's actually a gifted Sunday school teacher. The children enjoy hearing him. He's always looking for volunteers to go lead these services. So he asks Spurgeon, "Would you be willing, on a Sunday evening to go out into the villages? You're going to be accompanying another young man. You don't have to preach. He'll preach. You just lead in the singing and the prayers and encourage him." And Spurgeon says, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." So in probably January of 1851, they head out to the village of Teversham. He heads out with another young man. They're talking along the way, and Spurgeon says to him, "Hey, I'm looking forward to hearing your sermon." And the other young man says, "Wait, I was told you were going to preach."
Oh.
And he says, "If you're not going to preach, there's not going to be a service because I don't have anything ready. Why don't you just give one of your Sunday school lessons?" Uh, and so Spurgeon right there begins to wrestle. He's never preached a sermon before, but he thinks to himself, "I can tell a few poor cottagers about the love of Jesus." And so he decides, "I'm going to give it a try." He's going to preach from 1 Peter 2, "Unto you who believe, Christ is precious." He shows up, preaches his very first sermon, gets through it, doesn't break down. He kind of expounds on the preciousness of Christ to the believer in all kinds of circumstances. And he kind of wraps up the sermon and preaches his very first one. So at that point, he is 16 years old,
Wow.
and he thinks, "Hey, maybe I can do this." So he joins that lay preaching society. And before you know it, he is preaching a few times a week, kind of there in the villages surrounding Cambridge. By the age of 17, a little village called Waterbeach calls him to be their pastor. So he's like a bivocational pastor now, teaching during the week as a tutor, preaching, pastoring in the weekends there in Waterbeach. And before long, London, a church in London, the New Park Street Chapel, this historic Baptist church in London, they are without a pastor. They hear about this phenomenal young preacher in the villages of Cambridge. They invite him to come to fill the pulpit. He goes December of 1853. And from his very first sermon there, the congregation is struck. They love hearing this young man preach. They urge the deacons, "Hey, you got to invite him back." And by the spring of 1854, they've called him to be their pastor. He's 19 years old.
Chimney crickets. All right.
Yeah, and this is a phenomenon. I mean, like London has never seen a 19-year-old preacher quite like this. Right away, crowds are coming to hear him. The members of the church are telling all their neighbors, "You must come and hear this young man." The newspapers are writing about him, so that within the first year, they have filled up their building, turning people away. Before long, they are needing to take external venues like Exeter Hall, which seats 3,000, then the Surrey Gardens Music Hall, which seats 10,000. And they are filling those venues, and people are not only just hearing Spurgeon, but they're being converted under his preaching, and they're being baptized and joining his church. Until finally, 1861, he builds the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which seats 6,000. Can you imagine a pastor building a building that seats 6,000? You got to have confidence to know that you can fill those seats. But
Really?
they did. And yeah, in 1861, the Metropolitan Tabernacle becomes kind of this base of operations for this amazing ministry under Charles Spurgeon.
Gracious good. Hey, we're enjoying our conversation here with Dr. Geoff Chang, and we're talking about Charles Haddon Spurgeon and learning more about him. So, is it, do you think it was his delivery that drew people? Do you think it was his ability to be able to connect the dots in that kind of a simple way that he got converted to, hey, how do I take theology and other things that I know, but I kind of, as we might say it around here, we put the hay down on the barn floor where
Mm.
everybody can
Yeah.
eat it, right? I mean, and you can find a spot to be able to, is it a kind of a combination of all of that? Or what do you think the draw was?
It is. It is a combination of all of that. The preaching in those days that was popular in London, that was accepted and expected, Would have been more intellectual, perhaps a bit more dry, kind of proper in terms of
Mhm.
delivery. There was a kind of etiquette that was associated with preaching. Spurgeon didn't have any of that. He came from the countryside. He's preaching to farmers. But before he showed up in London, one of the things that we've worked on here in the Spurgeon Library is publishing all his sermon notebooks from those earliest years when he was just preaching as an itinerant preacher, as a village preacher there in London. He preached something like 700 sermons
Gee whiz.
before he showed up to London. So here you have a 19-year-old with, the equivalent of over a decade's worth of preaching experience, and he's bringing theological depth, like we talked about earlier. I mean, he's reading John Gill, he's reading the Puritans. He is deep in kind of the Reformed tradition in terms of theology. But then he's bringing warmth, he's bringing humor. He speaks to the common man. He uses illustrations, applications. So all that theological depth combined with a very simple, plain, straightforward, to the heart kind of delivery, and sweetened by the love of God in the gospel.
Mm.
So yeah, it's again preaching that Londoners had not heard. Many were saying we haven't heard preaching like this since the days of Whitefield and Wesley, right? That kind of rich theological but gospel infused kind of preaching.
Right.
And
With a delivery, right? I mean, there
with
had to be a
yeah,
delivery to it. I mean, he's got some great one-liners, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
and so when you can kind of connect to that, but it's his, I guess it's his time actually doing that preaching. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the Beatles going off to Germany for, 7 or 8 years, right? You're honing it, right? You're really getting it down and you're really kind of getting it figured out. And then when you get back, it connects in a great way.
yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah,
was the church itself? Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, was the church itself by the time that Metropolitan was built, was it still the same basic congregation at where he had been previously, or was this a new congregation altogether that they just kind of like, look, you've got the you got this thing, okay, we're with you and we're behind you. It's your church, go roll with it, or how did he work the dynamics of that out?
Yeah, same congregation.
Okay.
So they had grown obviously since the days that he got there. When he arrived, there were just like 30 people there. They used to be a leading church among Baptists. They were previously pastored by men like Benjamin Keach, John Gill, John Rippon. These were Spurgeon's predecessors. But they had over the years declined down to just a handful. But then, yeah, as he began preaching, they began growing again. And so the Metropolitan Tabernacle is a continuation of that earlier congregation.
I got you. And the tabernacle burned, right?
Yeah, so that would have been later after Spurgeon passed away
Oh,
it
okay.
happened under Thomas Spurgeon. Then it happened again during the World War II, as the bombs fell over London. So it's still standing today. The facade is the same as it was in Spurgeon's day, but the building behind it is quite smaller.
Oh, is it really?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a an interesting piece. So, how many, if you're just kind of looking at the stats, if we were creating a graphic, okay, to be able
Yeah.
to, how many sermons did he preach? Do you know that based off of what's there at the library, or is it just a good solid estimate based off of what you know?
Well, so he has over 3,500 published sermons.
All right.
So one of the amazing statistics of his ministry is starting. So he was called to pastor spring of 1854. His sermons were so popular that other publishers were beginning to like steal his sermons and publish them themselves without his permission.
Wow.
So January 1 of 1855, he forms a formal partnership with a publisher called Passmore and Alabaster, and they're going to work together to publish his sermons. And so they have a weekly sermon, a weekly Spurgeon sermon that's being published starting in the first week of January of 1855. And this continues for the next 63 years.
Jimmy.
Weekly
Wow.
sermon available from Spurgeon, even after he dies. He dies in 1892, and they continue to work through his catalog of sermons to continue publishing it all the way to 1917.
Was this
So
like a subscription that you would get? I mean, that delivered, or would a
no,
newspaper or a magazine? Because he had a magazine as
he
well,
did have
right?
a magazine. That's right.
Mm.
No, but this was a sort of little pamphlet that you could buy every week on Thursday. You could go down and get your groceries and pick up your milk and veggies, and with that pick up your copy of Spurgeon's, latest weekly sermon. And so this was a staple within evangelicalism for 63 years. There in the UK, in America, people could get the weekly Spurgeon sermon. So in those sermons, we have over 3,500 published sermons. We have his earliest sermons, I said about 700. So there's another, so now the count is up to 42, 4,300. But there are many more unpublished sermons, sermons that he gave on the road extemporaneously, so I would guess the final count would probably be closer. I mean, it would not be a surprise if it was closer to 10,000 sermons.
Wow.
Yeah, he preached extemporaneously. Yeah, it's remarkable.
Well, and you mentioned people like Whitefield, for example. I mean, there are those that during their time that if you put on the great preacher list, right,
Yeah,
of those that did it, there's one thing about preaching and creating and delivering that many sermons, but there's something else about having those that were sermons that were published and read, and
yeah,
people that did a published piece to that, and they don't always line up that way, right? I mean, to not only be able to preach that many sermons, but also to have that much of a written documentation that really, that you could go back in a catalog, be able to see, and all these other sermons that are there. That also probably puts, and I'm guessing, Spurgeon in a different category as well, just because
yeah, that's
you
right.
have the corpus of this info.
Yeah, Whitfield, I mean, if you look at his collection of sermons, it's significant, but it's nowhere near kind of Spurgeon's output. And part of what's going on there is Whitfield, I think, preached a lot, but he was an itinerant preacher, so he could
Right.
re-preach a lot of sermons. Spurgeon would lament the fact that once a sermon is published, he really couldn't use it again because so many people would have read it and they wanted to hear something fresh, So
Right.
yeah, he could re-preach a sermon if it hadn't been published yet. So he could take something that he preached at his church, preach it somewhere else. But once it was published, he's like, yeah, I can't use it, and he
Yeah.
invented that
Well, even
something.
pastors today, though, they might have been at church X, but now they're called and they're at church Y, you know, no hidden secret, right? Those sermons show up again, right? Because
Yeah,
he's at a different
yeah,
congregation. It's altogether a different thing when
yeah,
people are coming to see you every week at one spot and you're not moving around to other churches, whether
yeah,
itinerant or not. You didn't get, called to go to, some other church in, Edinburgh somewhere, right? I mean,
yeah,
you stayed in one spot.
yeah. That's right. Yeah, so that's part of my research on Spurgeon. So much of my work has focused on his pastoral ministry. So with a church so large, with his fame and preaching, I really wrestled with, is he really pastoring a church or is this more like
Mm,
a preaching station? And as I looked into it, boy, it was so encouraging to see he actually was a local church pastor. There were members of the church that joined the church and they had a membership interview with Spurgeon. They practiced things like church discipline. They had members meetings where they took members in and saw members out. He had elders who did house to house visitation. They would keep track of your attendance, and if you hadn't shown up in 3 months, an elder would come visit you and make sure you're doing okay. So they actually functioned as a local church, which I think really made him sort of grounded. As
mm.
famous as he was, at the end of the day, he was a local church pastor, and that's where he found his sort of primary identity.
Wow. Well, tell us though about the library. Tell us about how in the world did the Spurgeon Library show up in Kansas City, Missouri, of all the spots that it could have been to. So I'm sure there's a great story there. But then also tell us about what's in the collection.
Yeah, so the Spurgeon Library here in Kansas City, you can go on spurgeon.org and see pictures and videos. But we have here 6,000 volumes of Spurgeon books. Let's be clear, these are not books about Spurgeon. These are his books, the books that he owned.
Wow.
So his books, commentaries, Puritan works, theology textbooks, hymnals, books on church history, books on ecclesiology. all kinds of books of general interest. He loved reading about nature. He had fiction work. He had his set of Dickens magazines, all kinds of things. Like all 6,000 volumes have made their way here to Kansas City. They came over in 1906, and in 2006, they originally came and they were with William Jewell College, which was the Missouri Baptist Seminary at the time.
Okay.
And in 2006, Midwestern Seminary was able to acquire that collection. And we have this beautiful space called the Spurgeon Library to house the books, to display them. And it's not only a museum where we tell the story of his life and ministry, but it's also a research center. So we have
Mm,
not only his books, but we have all his papers also. This past 2 years ago now, we acquired the collection from from Spurgeon's College, UK. They had their heritage collection that they inherited from the family, from the Spurgeon family, and we were able to bring that entire collection here to Kansas City. So, in one sense, we've reunited all of Spurgeon's books and all of his papers and manuscripts and letters and documents. So, we rebuilt his study, as it were, here in Kansas City. Yeah, if you are interested in Spurgeon scholarship, I would argue this is really the center of that universe, and you need to come do your work here.
absolutely. So if I want to understand some subject like Spurgeon and natural history, because
Yeah,
that might be something I'm interested in,
yeah,
you're the epicenter to go figure all that out because you've
exactly right.
got so be able to. And I'm assuming just like any other archival collection, there's a certain amount of things that Joe public can walk in and see, and then there's another whole set of things for you to actually be able to do research there at the center itself.
Yeah,
Maybe the
that's
white
exactly
glove
right.
stuff, right? Not
That's
where
right.
you're not just checking these things out with hopes that you're going to bring them back later, right? You're just
Yeah,
like any
you
other good
understand.
archive.
Yeah, we see it as part of our stewardship to preserve these resources, right? For many generations, Lord willing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell me, as you're from what you see and the research that's going on, what do you think draws people who would want to do this research, academics, people who are in the ministry, and others like that? What would you guess? And this is just a guess. What would you guess is probably a consistent aha, oh my gosh, I didn't know that about the guy. I mean, I knew that he preached all these things. I knew that he had these great sermons. I knew that these were some things about him. But now that I've learned about, or maybe just even from your own study, I learned this stuff about him, just like you're saying, him being a pastor as well as a preacher in that truer sense. What would you say are things that maybe people are that come away from their time of doing research that said, I really just didn't know this about this guy?
Mm. Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're studying. It's so many things. Part of what draws people to work on Spurgeon is, first of all, they enjoy him. They enjoy his sermons, his preaching. But we often kind of, one of the things that we're trying to help people see is that there is a depth to his character and his thinking and his theology and philosophy of ministry. So, beyond the sort of memes that we see online and the quotes that we like,
Right.
here is a man who actually thought deeply about ministry, about theology, about the world that he lived in, all the current events going on, all his political engagement. There are lessons to be learned here. And uh, often what people are so surprised by is just how relevant he is, to us today.
Mm,
Not that that has to be kind of the first thing, but you've got to understand Spurgeon for who he is. But once you do that, once you understand his context, boy, there is so much wisdom to be gleaned from a figure like that. So,
wow.
it feels like we're still very much early in the sort of in the phases of kind of Spurgeon scholarship, and we're still just starting to learn about how much he has to teach us. And it's exciting.
Absolutely. So what was kind of the legacy? Let's say after he died,
Mm.
and the church itself, and what was what did it look like at the church after that, after Metropolitan, and the rest of that time of that church body, that would have, did he have children that went into the ministry? Did he have others that had been under his tutelage? I would guess if And somebody as a Spurgeon, right? I mean, it's not like a
Yeah.
name that's floated around a whole lot, right? To be able to, you're either probably kin or not kin, right? All the way back from being a part of. But what would you say is part of his ongoing, well, not just his legacy that you're able to see there because of others being able to talk about his scholarship, but kind of literally what happened to all of that after his death?
Yeah. So part of that story is needing to talk about something that happened towards the end of his life, which is known as the downgrade controversy.
Okay.
So, uh, in brief, kind of 1887, 1888, Spurgeon is in conflict with his own denomination, the Baptist Union, because there is this new theology, he calls it, this modernist theology that's adapting kind of rationalistic ideas and trying to apply them to Christianity. So there was increasingly among some pastors in the Baptist Union a tolerance or even an embrace of this new version of Christianity that rejected the inspiration of Scripture, that rejected miracles, that denied eternal punishment, that denied substitutionary atonement. And Spurgeon, as he looked at all that, he understood, no, this is not just a sort of modernizing of Christianity. This is not
Mm.
Christianity at all. Once you've lost these historic doctrines, you have a totally different religion. And so he raised the alarm. He, urged the Baptist Union to adopt some kind of official confession of faith that would remove anybody that embraced this new theology. But the Baptist Union was divided on this. A lot of the pastors felt like, no, we need to be united. We need to tolerate pastors who embrace this. Let's not divide. And so in the end, Spurgeon resigned from the Baptist Union, which was a huge bombshell. The most famous Baptist pastor leaving his own denomination. And so in response, the Baptist Union kind of issued an official kind of censure or rebuke of Spurgeon. And then they passed a statement of faith that was not a confessional boundary, but it was more of just a historic declaration that historically they have held to evangelical convictions. But they included all kinds of footnotes to say, but not everybody believes this anymore, and that's okay. So that really marked a turning point there in British evangelicalism. This was happening among Baptists, but also among other denominations. And, as we move into the early 20th century, we see these debates continue to grow among evangelicals, and kind of convictional evangelicalism begins to decline. Uh, we look at Christianity and the state of Christianity today in the UK, it's quite different than what it was in Spurgeon's day. And part of the reason for that is because of the growth of this theological liberalism
Wow.
in the 20th
Wow.
century. Uh, in the midst of that, Spurgeon's, pastors, the pastors that he trained from the pastors' college, they remain conservative by and large. The Metropolitan Tabernacle has always remained evangelical, but there is increasingly a move towards more Arminian. They're increasingly more influenced by American revivalism
Okay.
as opposed to kind of the Reformed background that the particular Baptists kind of came from. So you see that transition happening with Thomas Spurgeon, who was a successor to Charles there at the Metropolitan Tabernacle, and then certainly the pastors that followed Thomas Spurgeon. Um, so yeah, it's a larger story to tell. The Metropolitan Tabernacle remains conservative theologically, but they do shift in terms of theological framework. Um, yeah, and so I think there is a movement there. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, the Pastors College continues down to the 20th century, 21st century. You might have heard this, but this is public news. In recent years, just this past summer, actually, the Pastors College has closed. So
Oh,
Spurgeon's
no, I
College
didn't.
UK, yeah, they uh they have financial difficulties, and so they closed. Um, the legacy that Spurgeon leaves behind, though, gospel preaching, right? A
Mm.
commitment to preaching, preaching the scriptures, a strong commitment to Calvinistic theology, a commitment to training up men for the ministry, right? He had a heart for pastoral training, training preachers over the course of his lifetime, 900 men were trained and sent out to pastor. And they were church planners, they were church revitalizers, they were missionaries. And then one thing that often is overlooked, but we're seeing more attention being brought to it, is a tremendous heart for philanthropy.
Hmm.
His orphanage ministries. He founded two orphanages, one for boys, one for girls, and he really saw that as not a competition to preaching the gospel, but a platform for preaching the gospel. Right, as you care
Right.
for the poor, it opens up doors for evangelism. And so these are things that I think continue on with us today in terms of his influence.
Absolutely. So, I mean, a real, you know, Great Commission, discipleship component piece, a real salt and light piece, right? A real, all of that, though, grounded in a very solid theological framework of understanding, no, this is scripture and we're going to
Yeah.
preach the word. And from the word, I know what the word is telling us to do. And things like orphanages or salt and light type of things that we go back out into our community. And yes, that may be a great vehicle for us to preach the gospel. But at the same time, there's a practical piece of that, that these are orphans that don't have a home. And so we need to be doing those things in our community, in addition to making sure as a church that they are being pastoral and they are doing the things that to feed the sheep, right? That are there to do. So, what a fascinating person, right? To think about not only just where he came from and how God was able to use him in all of that, but once he got a hold of it and it really moved that way, he didn't move away from the core things that he understood of what the church was supposed to be and what the
Yeah.
church was supposed to be about. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
that's well said.
I was going to preach in there for a minute, Dr. Chang, so
I love it.
I don't want to get too far over that. That's not why anybody tunes in, right? Is to hear the opinions of me, I can assure you. But that's fantastic. Well, tell us again how people learn more about Spurgeon, where do they go to learn more about the library?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about the library, go to our website, spurgeon.org. We've got a digital library there. You can see a video of our collection, all kinds of resources there. Also, if you want to learn more about Spurgeon's work as a pastor, feel free to check out my book, Spurgeon the Pastor, Recovering a Biblical and Theological Vision for Ministry. So you might find that encouraging.
Absolutely. We find it encouraging. We want to make sure that we put in our show notes and other things as well too, so people can follow along and be able to learn more about part of that. So, Dr. Geoff Chang, thank you so much for being with us on This Week in Christian History and giving us this great deep dive into learning more about Spurgeon.
Joy to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. People who want to be able to follow along, in case you're following this along on YouTube or another way, we've got a podcast that is derived from this interview. You can find that on Spotify. You can find that on Apple and here on our webpage as well. On our YouTube page in particular, the actual podcast episode that was released as part of this ongoing ministry that we have at the Center for Christian History.com, where you can learn more about us there. Thanks.